Earlier I explained that a two-note per string scale form on the guitar, or arpeggio, really has two sides to it. In terms of pitch, the low side, which is toward the nut, and the high side, which is toward the body. Our pentatonic scale clearly has these two sides, and all five pentatonics link together like puzzle pieces. The low side of the six-string root pentatonic is a straight line. We have perfect fourths except for this major third interval right here between the second and the third strings, third and second strings. Then on the high side you have that shape. And by the way, you can build chords out of this. We've talked about that in some jazz and funk series. And the intervals, you have a major third, then all the rest are perfect fourths. All right, now these are called finger rolls. They're one of the most overlooked techniques. A lot of guys don't get concerned about articulation. I want you to think clearly in terms of being a monophonic instrument right now, just like a saxophone, where you can only play one note at a time. Now that would negate you ever doing a blur like that, a double stops. Not that you can't do it when you're playing rhythm and lead, but we're going to define that you must stay monophonic and you must be legato, which means you want each note to ring right up to the next note. I'm a big fan of practicing playing legato because this instrument is easily played in a staccato fashion. You want it to sing just like the voice. I'm going to give you two techniques here, ascending and descending finger rolls. And this will be a big rut buster if you're not aware of them or if you haven't really studied them. By the way, I call them pesky little finger rolls because I don't care how long you've been playing, they are not as easy to use as just staying on the tips of your fingers. If you just play on the tips of your fingers, you can really shred, but every time you have to throw a finger roll in, it's like a little bit of an ankle weight. It slows you down, and you have to work through it, but the benefits far outweigh any of the troubles you run into. Now, finger posture. If you come in too upright, you have some problems. You don't get the right tone, and also your fingers have to dampen the adjacent strings. But if you come in too flat-fingered, this is where it's going to get you in big trouble. You might get away with playing pretty flat-fingered, back on the pads and even flattening some joints when you're just playing the single notes and you're walking. But if you try to execute these finger rolls, you're not going to work. Here's how it works. Let's say we take the lowest note in this scale, that A, 5th fret, the root, 6th string. If you walk, you're going to go to the next note up in the scale. But what we're going to be doing is playing every other note of the scale. And in our pentatonics, that will involve either a perfect fourth interval or a major third interval. That's 5 half steps or 4 half steps. Learn the theory, it all links together. Instead of hopping, let's look at our options. If you bar, what do we have? We're not monophonic anymore. You're letting two notes ring together. That's not what we want. If you use the tip of your finger and you hop, well, we got a problem. Look what happened. My low E started ringing. You know how the string can kind of stick to the flesh when you take your finger off? So left hand dampening or muting is critical. And also, it tends to be a bit choppy. It's not as legato as... So here are ascending finger rolls. And by the way, the last joint on your fingers is called the DIP joint. You're going to play that A, and then you're going to roll over. You're going to collapse the DIP joint to go over to the D. You've played every other note of that pentatonic scale. You didn't play the C, which is the next logical move. You're going to go up to the D. Check yourself. After you've gone over to there, you should be deadening the two adjacent strings. Now, you can't do this if your thumb's too far around. Now, I'm not there when you're practicing to maybe offer some suggestions. You've got to be your own teacher. I'm just your coach. Always assess your left hand position. I tell my students there is one ideal hand position for every note they ever play based on their anatomy and their instrument. You've got to find that. It goes back to that sense of touch, and just do some analysis and try different things. You'll know what works and what doesn't. Maybe not overnight. I mean, there have been times in my classical playing where I changed fingerings after 10 years. But that's the ongoing process of being as good a musician as possible. So here we go. That's what I would call low, low. Where am I getting that from? It's on the low side of the pentatonic. And the high side of the pentatonic will be over here in the 8th and 7th frets. So our pattern simply goes low, low, high, high. Well, now that's not a finger roll because that's a major third interval on the 5th and 6th strings. But what is my first finger doing? Dampening. That's going to be real important if you got overdrive or if you're clean. So every day you got to practice playing the pentatonic scale in finger rolls. Right hand's using down up strokes. You could also hybrid pick. See, I'm using the pick and my middle finger. Once you've done those, I would suggest you do those for a while. I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, discipline yourself and see how well you can play them, and any hand adjustments you have to make, do so. And if you're in different places, it's going to feel different, so make sure you practice from one end of the neck to the other. After you've done that, it kind of goes back to when I explained pre-bends. I said you shouldn't start doing a pre-bend until after you spent a lot of time bending all the way up and you knew what it felt like, right? Your second most important sense. Same thing here. Excuse me. You want to make sure that you know what it feels like after you've executed the finger roll. Now we're going to work backwards, descending finger rolls. You see how you start with that DIP joint hyperextended, and in doing so you should be deadening the next lowest string so that when you roll over you're in just the right spot. Now aim for the bullseye. Don't accept, oh, okay, I got that note, but it was perilously close to back on the pad and almost dropped it. Or if you did this, if you were going to bend, guess what? You got to be in the right spot. Now you could finger that with 2 fingers, but you could also finger it with a descending finger roll. You see that? So then, now watch what I'm doing. I take this exercise and, or different fingerings, you see? Now those aren't finger rolls, that's 1 finger per note fingering. That has its benefits. You can do some really neat things where you just assign 1 finger to each note. But we want these finger rolls. So if I take my pentatonic scale, I take a technique and I run it through the scale, here's what you get. For example, and so on. Now I want to step back a minute. Remember earlier on we talked about upper and lower neighbors of the pentatonic scale. When I demonstrated it, I took the next higher or lower note in the scale. Okay, in the next segment I'm going to talk about applying other choices as opposed to just the adjacent note. We're going to go somewhere else.